The wind had no memory and no mercy. It came down from the northern mountains without a sound, a solid wall of cold that scoured the high plains of Wyoming. It was late November, 1889, and the world had been reduced to three colors: the gray of the sky, the dead brown of the prairie grass, and the dirty white of the old. Stubborn snow patches hiding in the gullies. The town of Three Forks was little more than a muddy scar on the landscape. Its buildings, raw timber and false fronts, leaned against the weather. The main street was a river of freezing mud, churned by wagon wheels and shod horses, deep enough to swallow a boot. The air smelled of wood smoke, horses, and the bitter iron promise of the blizzard that the sky held like a lung full of glass. Into this, Eli rode. He sat his horse like he was part of it, a big man hunched against the cold in a heavy sheepskin coat worn smooth with use. The brim of his hat was pulled low, casting his face in permanent shadow. Only a thick, untrimmed beard, dusted with frost, was visible. He did not look at the few people who hurried along the boardwalks, heads down, nor at the shuttered windows. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy, a man who wasted nothing, not a motion, not a word. He dismounted in front of the General Mercantile, his boots sinking into the muck. He tied his horse, a rough-coated buckskin, to the hitching post. The horse stood with its hip cocked, patient, as if it, too, had learned silence from its rider. Inside, the store was warm and smelled of coffee beans, cured leather, and dried apples. Phineas Mott, the proprietor, stopped sorting nails and nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Eli, bad one coming." Eli just grunted, pulling off his gloves. His hands were scarred and thick. He moved through the narrow aisles, gathering what he needed: a 50-pound sack of flour, a 10-pound bag of Arbuckle's coffee, salt, lard, a box of 4570 cartridges. He paused at the counter, his gaze landing on the rows of glass bottles. "Need laudanum," he said. The words were a low rumble, rough from disuse. Phineas fetched a small brown bottle. "Painin' you again?" Eli did not answer. He just laid a few silver dollars on the worn wood. He took his supplies, loading them into his saddlebags and a heavy canvas sack he tied behind his cantle. He had one last stop. The saloon was named the Silver Dollar, but there was nothing bright about it. It was noon, but the interior was dark as dusk, the windows fogged with grime and steam. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and the sharp tang of cheap whiskey. A half-dozen men were scattered at the tables or leaning against the bar. Eli pushed through the bat-wing doors. The conversations quieted for a beat, then resumed. Lower. He was known, not by name, to most, but by reputation. The man who lived alone out on the North Ridge. The man who came to town 4 times a year and spoke to no one. He walked to the bar, his spurs ringing softly on the filthy floorboards. He kept his coat on. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, a nervous man named Hobbs. As Hobbs reached for a bottle, a woman moved past Eli, carrying a tray of empty glasses. Eli froze. He had not seen her it must have been 6 years, maybe 7. He remembered her in a bright red dress, her hair piled high, her laugh loud and false in the smoky haze of a mining camp saloon hundreds of miles south of here. He remembered her face, younger then, but already hardening. Clara. She looked different, thinner. The life had been pressed out of her. Her hair, the color of corn silk, was pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a plain gray dress, patched at the elbows, and a stained apron. She was wiping down a table, her movements weary, mechanical. She had not seen him. A man at a nearby table, a local hand named Silas Croft, reached out and grabbed her wrist. He was thick-bodied and flushed with drink. "Hey, Clara," he slurred, his voice loud enough to carry. "You're a long way from the goldfields, ain't you?" Clara tried to pull her arm free, her face pale, but her eyes flashed. "Let me go, Silas. I remember you." He laughed, tightening his grip.
Used to cost a man $5 just to look at you. What's the price for a worn-out saloon girl in a mud hole like this? A nickel?
He yanked her arm, pulling her off balance. She stumbled against the table, and he grabbed her waist with his other hand.
Come on, sweetheart. Just one for old time's sake.
Clara's hand balled into a fist, but she was trapped. The other men watched. Some grinned. Hobbs, the bartender, looked down, polishing a glass. Eli turned. Slow. He had not received his drink. He did not raise his voice. He simply moved, stepping between Silas and the bar. He placed his left hand, still in its heavy leather glove, on Silas's shoulder. He did not grab, he just placed it. The weight of it was enough. The cold from the sheepskin coat seemed to emanate from him. The lady said to let her go. The words were flat, devoid of anger, devoid of anything but fact. Silas looked up, his drunk eyes trying to focus. He saw the big man, the shadow under the hat.
This ain't none of your affair. Hermit, this is between me and...
Eli's fingers closed, not fast, but with the steady, crushing pressure of a vice. Silas's face went from red to white. A gasp choked off in his throat. The grip wasn't on his shirt. It was on the bone and muscle beneath.
Let her go!
Silas's hand flew open, releasing Clara's wrist. His other hand let go of her waist as if she were hot iron. He tried to stand, but Eli's grip held him pinned to the chair. Clara scrambled back, breathing hard, rubbing her arm. She stared at Eli, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Eli held Silas in place for another 3 heartbeats, the silence in the saloon so thick it was like wool. Then, he released his grip and stepped back. Silas Croft pushed his chair back, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. His hand hovered over the pistol at his hip. Eli did not move. He just watched. He had not unbuttoned his coat. He had not shifted his stance. He simply stood, a block of granite, waiting. The drunk courage in Silas died. He saw the absolute emptiness in the stranger's posture, the lack of any fear at all. He knew, as every man in that room knew, that drawing on this man would be the last thing he ever did. Silas spat on the floor. She's a whore, anyway. You're welcome to her. He stormed out of the saloon, shoving the bat-wing doors so hard they slammed against the outer walls. The saloon was quiet. The men went back to their drinks, but the conversation was gone. Hobbs the bartender poured Eli's whiskey with a shaking hand and pushed it across the bar. Eli ignored it. He turned to Clara, who was standing by the kitchen door, her entire body trembling. He looked at her, really looked. He saw the red mark on her wrist. He saw the exhaustion in the lines around her eyes. He saw the old defiance. Now just a flicker, like the last ember in a fire. He walked over to her. The other men strained to hear, but his voice was too low. I need a hand at my ranch, he said. He did not look at her face, but at a spot on the wall just past her shoulder. Cooking, cleaning, place is a mess. The blizzard's coming. Might be snowed in for months. Clara stared at him. She remembered him now, too. A quiet man at the gold camp. Never bought a girl. Drank his 1 whiskey and left. They said he'd been a soldier, or an outlaw. No one knew. A hand? She repeated, her voice hoarse. I pay $1 a day. Room and board. Through the winter. Maybe longer, if it suits. She looked around the saloon. She saw the leering faces, now pretending not to watch. She saw Hobbs, who would fire her for causing trouble, even though it wasn't her fault. She had $2 to her name, and her rent at the boarding house was due in 3 days. She had no other place to go. This town, like every town, had judged her and found her wanting. This man was offering an escape, or maybe a different kind of prison, but it was, at least, a choice. I don't have things to pack. Doesn't matter, Eli said. He tossed $2 silver on the bar, 1 for the whiskey he hadn't touched, 1 for the trouble. He looked at Clara. Get your coat. She had only a thin wool shawl. She grabbed it from a peg by the door. She didn't look back at Hobbs. She didn't look back at anyone. She just followed the wide, sheepskin-covered back of the man who had appeared out of her past like a ghost. They stepped out onto the boardwalk. The wind hit them, sharp and violent, stealing their breath. The murmuring started before the saloon doors even swung shut. "Did you see that? Just hired on the camp girl. That's Eli, the hermit from the ridge. Taking a whore out to his cabin. Can you imagine? Snowed in all winter. No good will come of it. Mark my words." The whispers followed them down the street. Eli untied his buckskin, then walked to the livery. He returned a few minutes later leading a second horse, an older mare with a sway back and a gentle eye. He paid the livery stable owner for the lease of the horse until spring. "You ride?" he asked Clara. "I've ridden," she said. He checked the cinch on the mare, then gestured for her to mount. He did not offer a hand up. He simply waited. Clara, her fingers numb, grabbed the pommel and awkwardly pulled herself into the cold, worn saddle. Eli swung up onto his own horse in one fluid motion. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a heavy, rolled wool blanket. He tossed it to her. "Wrap up. It's a 3-hour ride. It'll be dark before we're halfway." He didn't look back at the town of Three Forks. He didn't look at the pinched, judgmental face of the storekeeper's wife, who watched them from her window. He just nudged his horse into a walk, heading north, out of the filthy street and onto the open, frozen prairie. Clara took one last look at the town. It was a collection of wooden boxes filled with cold people. She felt nothing for it. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and legs, pulling it tight under her chin. The wool was rough and smelled of horse and smoke. She urged the mare to follow him. The wind began to howl in earnest, a high, lonely sound that seemed to come from the sky itself. The first sharp needles of snow, hard and dry, began to sting her cheeks. The sun, which had been a pale smear in the west, vanished completely. Darkness fell fast, not like a curtain, but like a tide of black ink rising from the land. Soon, the only thing she could see was the broad, dark shape of Eli's back, a moving shadow against the deepening gray of the snow. The silence between them was absolute, broken only by the plodding of the hooves and the screaming of the wind. The world shrank to just the two of them, moving deeper into the vast, white and unforgiving wilderness. The storm hit them 2 hours after they arrived at the cabin. It came not as a gradual worsening, but as a solid white wall that simply appeared on the prairie and swallowed the world. For 3 days and 3 nights, the wind did not stop. It shrieked, a high, thin sound of a blade being sharpened on stone, vibrating in the timber of the small cabin. Life shrank to the 4 walls of the single room. It was a life of harsh routine, governed by the cold and the failing light. Clara rose first. In the pitch black before dawn, her feet, wrapped in rags, hit the bare floorboards with a shock that stole her breath. The water bucket by the door was always skinned with ice, which she had to break with the heel of her hand. Her first chore was to revive the embers in the stone fireplace. She would blow on them, her cheeks aching, until a small flame caught the kindling. Then, the coffee. She would grind the Arbuckle's beans in the small, squeaking mill, the aroma the only pleasant thing in the raw, cold air. She made biscuits from the flour he had bought, using lard and water, and fried thick slices of salt pork in the cast-iron skillet. Eli would rise as the smell of coffee filled the room. He did not say good morning. He would pull on his boots, shrug into his heavy sheepskin coat, and go out into the white darkness to tend the horses in the small, sturdy barn built against the side of a bluff. He would return, covered in snow, his beard frozen solid. He ate standing by the fire, gulping the hot coffee. He ate quickly, without pleasure, as if it were just another chore. Clara ate sitting at the small, rough-hewn table, her hands wrapped around her tin mug for warmth. The silence was the third person in the room. It was heavier than the snow piling up on the roof. It was a dense, suffocating thing that Eli wore like a second coat. After he ate, he would take his rifle and a length of rope and go out again. disappearing into the white fury of the storm. He would be gone for hours, checking his traps, or perhaps just walking. Clara did not know. She did not ask. Her days were spent in a battle against the dirt and the cold. The cabin was a man's space, and it showed. She scrubbed the floors with lye soap and hot water, her hands turning red and raw. She washed the few dishes, scrubbed the soot from the fireplace, and mended the tears in his blankets. She found mice droppings and swept them out, plugging the hole with a rag. She worked until her back ached and her fingers were numb. But the work was a blessing. It kept her from thinking. It kept her from looking at the man who sat across the room from her in the evenings. When the light failed, usually around 3 in the afternoon, the world outside ceased to exist. Eli would return. Silent as a shadow, he would clean his rifle, his movements economical and precise. He would sharpen his knife on a whetstone. The shing, 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 a sharp, nervous sound in the quiet. He would sit on his stool, staring into the flames, his face hard and unreadable, lost in a place she could not go. Clara would sit on her own cot, darning his socks, the needle moving in and out, in and out. She would watch him sometimes, when she thought he was not aware. She watched the way the firelight caught the gray in his beard and the deep lines etched around his eyes. He was not an old man, perhaps 40, but he looked as if he had been carved from the same hard granite as the mountains. He never looked at her. His gaze would pass over her as if she were a piece of furniture, a chair, a sack of flour. She was a hand. She cooked, she cleaned. She was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. The storm broke on the 4th day. The wind died, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like deafness. The world was white, blindingly so. The snow drifted higher than the cabin's single window. That afternoon, Eli took his horse and rode out, vanishing over a white ridge. The cabin felt impossibly empty without his brooding presence. Clara used his absence to air out the cabin, propping the door open for a few minutes despite the bitter cold. She swept the floor again and changed the linen on his cot. It was then that she went to the small, crude desk in the corner. It was just a few planks of wood nailed together, holding a ledger, an ink pot, and a few spent cartridges. She was meant to clean it. Nothing more. One drawer was stuck. She pulled it, gently at first, then harder. It came open with a short, protesting squeal. Inside, beneath a stack of yellowed receipts for grain and barbed wire, was a small, folded square of linen. It was not the rough cotton of their lives. It was fine, soft with a delicate lace edge. It was a woman's handkerchief. Her fingers, rough from the lye soap, trembled as she picked it up. It was clean, carefully preserved. In the corner, embroidered in blue silk thread, was a single, elegant letter. M. Clara stared at it. The stitching was perfect. She lifted it to her face. It held no scent, not of perfume, just the faint, clean smell of soap and thyme. This was the source of the silence. This was the ghost that sat between them at the fire. This M. She had wondered if his coldness was because of her past, because of what she was, what he had seen in that saloon. Now she knew. It had nothing to do with her at all. She was simply a barrier, a presence that kept him from being truly alone with this memory. She folded the handkerchief exactly as she had found it and put it back, pushing the drawer closed. The secret felt heavy, like a stone in her stomach. That night, the dynamic returned. He rode in late, his face grim, and took his place by the fire. He cleaned his rifle. She sat on her cot and sewed. But now, when she looked at him, she did not see a cold man. She saw a haunted one. She wondered who M was, a wife, a sweetheart, and where was she now? He seemed to feel her watching him. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers in the firelight. It was the first time he had truly looked at her since the saloon. His gaze was not angry. It was not cold. It was empty. A profound, hollow emptiness. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, then looked back into the fire, retreating behind his wall. The nights were the worst. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down on the blankets. Clara slept fitfully. The silence of the cabin was broken only by the crackle of the dying fire and the soft sounds of Eli's breathing from the other side of the room. About a week after the storm, she found herself back in the gold camp. She was not in the cabin. She was in the smoky, sour-smelling tent. A man was holding her, his breath hot and smelling of whiskey. It was not Silas. It was another man, a bigger one, the one who had... He was laughing. Other men were watching. The light was too bright. She could feel their eyes on her skin. She could feel his hands on the collar of her dress, the rough, calloused fingers grabbing the fabric. "Let's see what we paid for," he slurred. The fabric ripped. The cold air hit her chest. She was exposed. She was fighting, but her arms were weak. She could hear them laughing, a roaring in her ears. "No," she whispered. "Please, no." Sss. The hands were on her, pulling, tearing. "Stop!" Clara woke up, the scream tearing from her own throat. She was sitting bolt upright on her cot, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard it hurt. She was sweating, though the cabin was freezing. In the darkness, she heard a sound, a boot scraping the floor. A large shape materialized beside her. It was Eli. He was standing over her, just a black silhouette against the faint orange glow of the embers. She flinched, pulling the blanket up to her chin, her breath coming in ragged sobs. He just stood there. He did not move. He did not reach out to comfort her. He did not say, "It's all right." He simply stood, a guardian or a judge. She could not tell which. He waited, his presence a heavy weight in the dark. "You're here," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're not there. It's just the wind. Go back to sleep." He stood for another long moment, watching her, ensuring the hysteria had passed. She could feel his gaze on her, though she could not see his face. Then, as silently as he had come, he turned and went back to his own bed. Clara lay back down, her body trembling. He had not touched her. He had offered no softness, but he had come. He had stood between her and the shadows. It was more than anyone had done for her in a very long time. The next morning was thick with unspoken things. She made the coffee, her hands still shaking slightly. He pulled on his boots. She did not look at him. "Mr. Eli," she said, her voice quiet, addressing the floor. He stopped, his hand on the door latch. For last night. Thank you." He did not turn around. He grunted, a sound deep in his chest. Then he opened the door and went out into the blinding white morning. It was not much, but it was something. That day, the air between them felt different. It was still silent, but it was no longer an empty silence. It was a charged silence. When she handed him his plate, her fingers brushed the back of his hand. Both of them recoiled, just slightly, as if from a static shock. He looked up, his eyes wide for a moment, and she saw something flicker there. Not desire, not anger, fear. He looked away quickly, but the moment had happened. They were no longer just a man and his hand. They were a man and a woman, trapped by 1,000 miles of snow, and they were both terrified. A few days later, he was working by the fire, mending a leather bridle. He had been out in the snow, and his outer shirt was damp. He had taken it off and hung it by the fire, working in his long-sleeved woolen underwear. The fabric was old and thin, fitting his broad shoulders and back like a second skin. Clara was sitting nearby, sorting beans for their supper. She noticed a long, L-shaped tear in the shoulder of his outer shirt as it dried. "Your shirt," she said quietly. "It's torn. I can mend it." He glanced at the shirt, then at her. He seemed to hesitate, then gave a curt nod. She picked up her sewing basket and took the heavy wool shirt. The fabric was still damp and cold. She sat on the stool near him, turning the shirt to catch the light. "You have another," she said, squinting. "On the back, the fabric is worn thin." "Leave it," His voice was flat. "It will only get worse. It will be a hole by morning." She stood up, holding the needle and thread. "If you'll stand, I can reach it better." He let out a heavy sigh, as if annoyed, but he stood. He turned his back to her, facing the fire, continuing to work the leather in his hands. She stepped closer. She could feel the heat radiating from his back. She smelled the faint, clean scent of him, soap, wool, and the cold outdoors. She raised her hand to smooth the fabric, to pull the worn edges of the tear together. Her fingers brushed against his back. She stopped. It was not just the thin fabric she felt. Beneath it, his back was a landscape of ruined flesh. Thick, ropey scars crisscrossed his skin, from his shoulders down to his waist. They were old, white and silver in the firelight, but they were deep. They were not whip marks. They were worse. They looked like he had been torn apart and put back together wrong. Her breath caught in her throat, without thinking, driven by a sudden, aching pity. Her fingers traced the line of one great scar that ran from his shoulder blade to his spine. It was as if she had touched a hot stove. Eli flinched violently, his whole body seizing. He spun around, his arm knocking her hand away. The movement was brutal, fast, and shocking. The bridle fell to the floor. "Don't!" he snarled. The word was not loud, but it was more violent than any shout. His eyes were blazing, not with anger, but with a raw, panicked shame. He looked at her as if she had struck him. He snatched the torn shirt from her other hand, his fingers ripping the fabric further. He grabbed his heavy sheepskin coat, shoved his arms into it, and pulled it tight around himself, covering his body, covering the scars. He stared at her for one more terrible second, his chest heaving. Then he turned, yanked open the cabin door, and stormed out into the falling dusk, leaving her alone with the needle still raised in her trembling hand. He did not return for supper. The hours passed. The cabin grew cold. Clara added wood to the fire, her mind replaying that moment, the feel of his skin, the terrible, visceral reaction. He came back late, long after she had gone to her cot. She heard the door open, the soft stamp of snow from his boots. She heard him move to the fire, heard the groan of the wood as he sat on his stool. She lay perfectly still, pretending to be asleep, her back to him. The silence was back, but it was worse than before. It was a wounded, angry silence. She felt the shame of his reaction, and a new shame of her own. She had pitied him, and he had hated her for it. She heard him finally move from the fire, heard the rustle of his blankets as he lay down. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind rise again outside. She was so tired, tired of the cold, tired of the silence, tired of being invisible, and tired of being ashamed. She thought of the men in the saloon. She thought of the men in the gold camp. They had looked at her, and their eyes had stripped her bare. Now, this man, he would not look at her at all. She did not know which was worse. The candle on the small table beside her cot guttered, the flame dancing. She reached out, her hand shaking, and shielded it. She looked at her own pale reflection in the small, cracked shaving mirror he kept on the wall. She saw a plain, worn woman. Her fingers went to the high collar of her gray wool nightdress. She touched the top button. She thought of his scars. She thought of her own. The flame wavered. Eli was a dark lump on the other side of the room, utterly still. Clara's lips parted, and a whisper, so quiet it was barely louder than the wind, escaped into the cold darkness. "If I take it off, would you still look away?" He was gone before the sun cleared the eastern ridge. Clara heard him rise in the dark, the scrape of his boots, the rustle of his coat, the soft jingle of a bridle. The cabin door opened, letting in a single, brutal knife edge of gray light and freezing air. And then it shut, plunging the room back into darkness. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the loudest sound she had ever heard. It was a judgment. She lay still on her cot for a long time, not moving, her eyes wide open, staring at the sod roof above her. Shame was a physical thing. It was a cold, heavy sickness in her belly. It rose into her throat, choking her. Fool, fool, fool. What had she been thinking? Whispering in the dark like a $5 girl trying to entice a customer. If I take it off. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes, as if she could push the memory back into her skull. He had not answered. He had not moved. He had simply lain there, a dark shape on the other side of the room. And his silence had been her answer. He found her repulsive. Not just her past, but her need. Her pathetic, trembling attempt at, what? Seduction? Comfort? She did not even know. She had seen his scars and, in some broken part of her, had wanted to show him that she, too, was damaged. That they were the same. He had thrown her pity back in her face. And last night, he had thrown back her desire. She finally forced herself to move, to sit up. The cabin was ice. The fire was dead. A pile of gray-black ash. He had not even bothered to bank the embers. He had just left, fled. She got up, her bare feet landing on the frozen floorboards. She dressed, her fingers fumbling with the buttons, her hands shaking so hard she could barely tie her apron. She built the fire from scratch, her movements jerky and angry. She was angry at him for his coldness, but she was consumed by a deeper, burning hatred for herself. She scrubbed the floor. She kneaded dough for bread with a frantic, punishing energy, pounding the dough as if it were an enemy. And as she worked, the cabin walls seemed to press in, and the silence, no longer charged, was just empty and accusing. It forced her back, down into the places she spent every day trying to forget. She was not in a cabin in Wyoming. She was 14 years old, in the back of a stinking wagon, her father's hand heavy on her shoulder. He was a man broken by drink and a failed claim. "You'll be a help to Mr. Jebson," he'd said, his voice thick, his eyes not meeting hers. "He's a good man. He's given me $20 for your time." $20. The camp was not a camp. It was a pit, a cluster of tents in a muddy canyon, filled with men who had not seen a woman, a real woman, in months. Jebson was not a good man. He was a thick-bodied brute with a wet mouth and small, assessing eyes. He owned the saloon tent, the gambling, and the 3 women he kept in a smaller tent out back. Clara was the 4th. She remembered the smell, stale whiskey, sweat, unwashed wool, and the metallic tang of despair. She remembered the first man, and the second. She learned to make her mind go away, to float up to the canvas roof and watch the smoke stains swirl. She stayed for 2 years. She turned 16. The other women came and went. One died of a fever. One cut her own wrists with a skinning knife. Clara just endured. She hoarded. She hid $1 here, a silver quarter there, burying them in a small tin box under her cot. Then came the night. A new man, a miner flush with a small strike. Drunk and mean. He wanted something different. He wanted to hurt. Jebson allowed it, for an extra $10. The man had backed her against the tent pole. He had torn her dress. And something inside Clara, the part she thought was long dead, snapped. She had not screamed. She had smiled. She had reached for the whiskey bottle on the floor, as if to pour him a drink, and she had smashed it against the wooden crate. She did not remember stabbing him. She just remembered the sudden, wet warmth on her hand, the man's eyes, wide with surprise, the sound he made, a soft whoosh, like a bellows emptying. Jebson had run in. He had seen the man bleeding on the dirt floor. He had roared, his face purple. He had not gone for her. He had grabbed a branding iron from the fire he kept outside for his mules. "You ruined my property, girl," he'd hissed, advancing on her. "I'll mark you. You'll never run." She had thrown the broken bottle at his face. While he howled, clutching his eye, she had grabbed her tin box, ripped open the back of the tent, and run. She ran for 2 days, her feet bleeding, before she found a creek and followed it to a trapper's trail. She had $53 and the clothes on her back, and the scar, a long, puckered burn on her shoulder where the edge of the iron had grazed her as she fled. She had been running ever since, from town to town. Waitress, seamstress, whore, whatever kept her fed, whatever kept her moving. Until Three Forks. Until Eli. The sound of hooves jerked her back to the present. It was not one horse. It was several. Eli. He was back. She felt a wave of panic, then relief, then panic again. She ran to the small, grimy window, wiping the steam from it with her sleeve. It was not Eli. There were 4 men, dark shapes against the blinding snow. They were riding hard from the direction of the town. They were armed. Rifles were in their scabbards, and pistols were at their hips. She recognized one of them. Silas Croft, the man from the saloon. His face was puffy and mean. The other 3 she did not know, but they had the same look. They were not here for a social call. Her heart hammered. This was it. This was Jebsen. This was the miner. This was every man who had ever looked at her with that same expression. She backed away from the window, her hand flying to her throat. She was trapped. The cabin had one door. The wilderness was a white, frozen ocean. She looked at the fireplace, the heavy iron poker. She grabbed it, her knuckles white. It was not much, but it was not nothing. The horses stopped outside. She heard the crunch of snow, the jingle of harness, the low, angry voices. "Eli, you in there? Hermit!" Silas Croft's voice. She held her breath, pressing herself against the wall beside the door. "We know you're in there, and we know you got that whore with you." A rough laugh from another man. "Come on out. Eli, we just want to talk, neighbor to neighbor." The poker felt slick in her sweating palm. "He ain't here," another voice said. "Horse ain't in the barn. I checked." "He's here somewhere," Silas growled. "He'll be back. What about the girl?" "She's in there," the first man said. "Smoke from the chimney." A heavy boot hit the door. The wood shuddered. Clara jumped, stifling a scream. "Hey, Clara!" Silas shouted, his voice muffled by the wood. "We missed you in town. Silas told us all about you. We came to see if you was lonely out here. A man like Eli, he don't seem like much company." They laughed again. "Maybe she needs some real men." Another voice, a gravelly one, chimed in. "I seen her, back in the Sweetwater camp. Ain't that right? Travis?" "That's her," a new voice said. "Travis." He sounded lazy, almost bored. "Remember her. Used to be $1. She run off on Jebsen. Heard she cut a man." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. They knew. Her past was right outside the door. "See?" Silas roared. "She's trouble. She's a thief. Maybe a killer. We can't have her kind here, not near our women." "Eli," the man named Travis shouted. "You got till sundown. Get this trash off your land. We're decent folk here. We don't want her. You keep her. You're no better." Another boot kicked the door. "You hear us? Hermit? Sundown!" She heard them spitting, heard the creak of leather as they mounted up. "Let's go. He'll be back. He'll get the message." She listened as the sound of the horses faded, leaving only the sound of the wind and the frantic, rabbit thump of her own heart. She slid down the wall, the poker clattering to the floor. She was going to be sick. They would be back at sundown. And Eli was not here. He had left her. He had left her to this. She was still huddled on the floor when the door opened. She screamed, scrambling for the poker. It was Eli. He stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the snow. He held his rifle in one hand and a string of 3 dead rabbits in the other. His face was unreadable, lost in the shadow of his hat. "They were here," she whispered, her voice a dry croak. "I saw them," he said. His voice was flat. He stepped inside, closing the door. He looked at her, huddled on the floor, and then at the poker. They said, they know me," she stammered, the words tumbling out. "From the gold camp. They called me. They said I had to be gone by sundown, or they'll come back." She looked at him, her eyes desperate, begging. "They'll come back for you, because of me." Eli did not move. He just watched her. He set the rabbits on the table. He leaned his rifle against the wall. "I'll go," she said, scrambling to her feet. "I'll pack. I can walk. I'll be gone. I won't bring this on you. I swear. I'll be gone in 5 minutes." She ran to her cot and grabbed her thin shawl, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold it. She had nothing else. She had no coat. She had no boots, only her worn shoes. "I'll go." She made it to the door. She reached for the latch. His hand closed over her wrist. It was not a grab. Like Silas, it was not a blow. It was just a stop. His fingers wrapped around her arm, his grip firm, immovable. She froze, her back to him. "No?" The word was quiet, but it filled the cabin. "But they'll come back," she sobbed, the tears finally breaking. "They'll hurt you. They'll burn the cabin. It's what they do. You don't know them." "I know them," he said, his voice a low rumble right behind her ear. He did not let go of her wrist. "Sit down, Clara." "I can't." "Sit down." It was not a request. He turned her, gently but with unarguable strength, and guided her to the stool by the fire. She collapsed onto it, her body trembling. He stood over her, a great, looming shadow. "They don't tell you where you can be," he said, his voice flat, but with a new, hard edge she had not heard before. "They don't tell me who I can hire. This is my land. But I'm not just hired," she wept, her face in her hands. "You heard them. I'm a whore. I'm trash. I ran. I hurt a man." He was silent for a long moment. She felt his gaze on her bowed head. "They're not coming back," he said. "They said sundown. I was on the ridge. I watched them. They were 4 men trying to act like 20. They won't come back in the cold. Not for this." He paused. "Not tonight, anyway." He let out a long breath. He walked to the small shelf where he kept his supplies and took down the bottle of whiskey he had bought in town. It was still half full. He grabbed the 2 tin cups. He poured 2 fingers in each cup. He handed one to her. Her hand shook so badly the liquid sloshed. She looked at the amber fluid, then at him. "Drink it," he said. She lifted the cup and drank. The whiskey was raw, burning a trail of fire all the way down to her stomach. It made her cough, but it stopped the shaking. He downed his in one gulp, then poured another. He did not sit. He stood by the fire, staring into it, the tin cup held in his scarred hand. The sun began to set, the cabin filled with an orange, bloody light, then faded to a deep purple. Sundown came. Sundown passed. There was no sound but the wind. They ate the biscuits and salt pork she had made hours earlier. They ate in silence, but it was the silence of the storm. The charged, electric silence was back. He had stood up for her. He had called her by her name. He had not let her go. The tension was so thick she could barely breathe. He had not let her run into the snow. He had chosen to keep her. He had stood against those men for her. The fire crackled. He had not sat on his stool. He was on his cot, leaning against the wall, cleaning his rifle. The metallic snick-snick of the oiled rag sliding through the barrel was the only sound. She sat on her stool, her hands clasped in her lap. The whiskey had warmed her, but it had also stripped her bare. All her defenses were gone. She had been exposed, her past laid out for him to hear, and he had not thrown her out. She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was intent on the gun. She thought of his scars. She thought of her own. She was wearing the same thin wool shawl she always wore, wrapped tightly around her neck and shoulders. It was a habit, a way of hiding. He knew. He had heard Travis, "I'll mark you," slowly. Her hands went to the pin that held the shawl at her throat. She fumbled with it, her fingers numb. She pulled the pin free. The wool was rough against her skin as she unwound it. Eli stopped cleaning the rifle. The snick-snick sound ceased. She knew he was watching her. She did not turn to face him. She kept her back to him, but angled her shoulder toward the firelight. She pulled the collar of her gray dress down, exposing the skin of her shoulder and collarbone. There, livid and puckered in the flickering light, was the scar from Jebson's iron.
a 4-inch line of ruined flesh. "He said he owned me," she whispered, her voice husky. "He wanted to mark his property." She heard a sharp intake of breath from the other side of the room. She heard the sound of the rifle being placed, carefully, against the wall. She heard his boots on the floorboards. 1 step, 2. He stopped, right behind her. She could feel the heat of him. She did not dare turn. She did not dare breathe. She could feel his rage. It was a palpable thing, a dry heat radiating from him. It was not the cold, empty silence of before. This was alive. She turned her head, just slightly, and looked at him over her shoulder. His face was a mask of something she could not name, pain, fury, and something else, something that mirrored the aching hollow inside her. He was trembling. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. His gaze was fixed on her scar, as if it had mesmerized him. The shame was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was this terrible, raw, shared moment. She stood up slowly, facing the fire. Her whole body was shaking. The whiskey, the fear, the confession. She reached for the top button of her dress. Her lips parted. She was breathing fast, a shallow catch in her throat. She spoke to the fire, her voice a low, throbbing sound, half sob, half plea. "I'll take it off. Just do it." She waited. The fire crackled. The wind howled. She heard him move. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the wool of his shirt against her back. He did not touch her. Not yet. He was shaking. She could hear the tremor in his breath. He was fighting a war inside himself. She could feel the battle. The ghosts of M, the ghosts of his own scars, were in the room, warring with the living, breathing woman in front of him. He raised his hand. She felt the air move as it approached. His fingers, calloused, scarred, and trembling, brushed the skin of her back, just above the line of her dress. It was not a touch of possession. It was not a touch of lust. It was a question. A touch so light it was barely there, like a brand made of ice, a featherweight of agony and solace that made her entire body light up in the candlelight. His hand was fire and ice on her back. It did not move. It rested on the bare skin above her dress, his fingers splayed, his palm flat. He was trembling so violently his whole body seemed to vibrate with the effort. Clara kept her back to him, her own body rigid, waiting for the blow, for the rejection, for the laugh. Instead, she heard him take a single, ragged breath. He moved. His other hand, the left one, came to her shoulder. It did not grab. It settled. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was so light it was almost not there. He was touching her as if she were made of thin glass. He used the grip on her shoulder to turn her, slowly, to face him. She kept her eyes down. She could not look at him. She was a whore from a gold camp, offering herself. She was the woman from the saloon. She was trash. He did not speak. His hands moved from her back, from her shoulder. He raised them, and his scarred, thick fingers went to the top button of her dress, the one she had undone. She flinched. "Clara," he whispered. The word was a prayer or a curse. His fingers fumbled, clumsy with cold and tremor. He was not trying to rip the garment. He was trying to unbutton it. He undid the second button, and the third. The gray wool parted, revealing the high, patched collar of her thin chemise beneath. He was not looking at her with hunger. He was looking at her with a kind of terrible, agonizing reverence. His eyes, lost in the shadows, were fixed on her face. He pulled the dress from her shoulders. The heavy fabric slid down her arms, catching at her elbows, and then fell, pooling in a gray heap at her feet. She stood before him in the firelight, in a chemise so thin it was almost nothing. It was mended in 3 places. She crossed her arms over her chest, a useless, instinctive gesture of shame. "Don't," he whispered. He reached out and gently, so gently, pulled her hands away from her body, holding them at her sides. He held her wrists. He was just looking at her,
his breathing harsh and loud in the small room. He let go of her wrists and raised one hand. He touched her face. His thumb, rough as bark, traced the line of her cheekbone. "You are—" he started. His voice choked. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She leaned into his touch, a starved, desperate movement. This was it. This was the moment. The silence, the cold, the fear. It was all boiling down to this one single touch. He leaned in. His face, bearded and harsh, was close to hers. He was going to kiss her. She closed her eyes, and he screamed. It was not a word. It was a raw, animal sound of such profound agony that Clara's eyes flew open in terror. He had recoiled from her as if she had suddenly burst into flames. He staggered backward, his hands raised, palms out. He hit the edge of the table, sending a tin cup clattering to the floor. "No!" he gasped, his eyes wide, staring at her. But through her, "No, no, Mary!" The name hung in the air, a physical blow. He was not seeing her. He was seeing the ghost. He was seeing the woman from the handkerchief. Get dressed," he stammered, his voice cracking. He was shaking, not with desire, but with a visceral, gut-churning horror. He looked at her pale shoulders and thin arms, and his face contorted in a mask of revulsion and unbearable pain. "I can't," he choked out. "I can't." He turned, his movements frantic, blind. He grabbed his sheepskin coat from the peg. He was still wearing his woolen shirt, but he plunged his arms into the coat, fighting the sleeves. He looked like a trapped animal. "Eli, what?" she began, pulling the remnants of her dress up to cover herself. "Don't speak!" he roared, and the violence of it silenced her. He ripped the cabin door open. The wind and snow exploded into the room, a cloud of white, instantly extinguishing the candle and sending the fire embers scattering. "Eli, the storm!" He did not look back. He plunged out into the blackness, into the screaming white wall of the blizzard. The door slammed shut behind him, shaken by the wind, leaving Clara alone in the freezing, ruined darkness. She stood there, her body numb, the cold from the floor seeping into her bare feet. She was still half naked. The humiliation was a physical sickness. It was worse than Silas in the saloon. It was worse than Jebsen with the branding iron. Those men had seen her as an object of base desire. Eli had looked at her and seen a corpse. He had looked at her offering, her vulnerability, and he had seen the memory of his murdered wife. She was not a woman to him. She was a trigger for his own horror. She did not cry. She was too cold, too hollow. She mechanically pulled her dress back on, her fingers fumbling with the buttons he had undone. She sat on her stool, her back to the door. She did not add wood to the fire. She just sat in the growing cold. And for the first time in her life, she truly, profoundly, wished she were dead. He did not come back that night. The storm raged, a living thing trying to tear the cabin apart. She lay on her cot, fully clothed, wrapped in her blanket, and stared at the dark roof, listening to the wind howl his wife's name. Dawn was a faint, gray smear through the ice-caked window. The cabin was as cold as a grave. The fire was long dead. The door opened. She sat bolt upright, her heart stopping. He stumbled in. He was not a man. He was a creature of ice. His coat, his beard, his hat were a solid mass of frozen snow. He was visibly shaking, his body convulsing in great, shuddering waves. He looked past her, his eyes dead and hollow. He moved to the fireplace, his limbs stiff, and dropped to his knees. He began, with clumsy, frozen fingers, to build the fire, his back to her. Clara watched him. The hatred she had felt for herself had curdled into a cold, hard pity. He was a broken thing. They were two broken things. She got up. She did not speak. She broke the ice in the water bucket. She filled the coffee pot and set it on the hook over the fire he was building. The silence was absolute. broken only by his chattering teeth and the crackle of the new kindling. He finally got the fire roaring. He did not take off his coat. He just knelt before it, his hands held out, trying to thaw. He spoke to the flames, his voice a dead, hollow rasp. Her name was Mary. Clara stopped, her hand on the bag of coffee beans. She did not turn. The handkerchief, the M, it was hers. He coughed, a dry, racking sound. She was my wife. He fell silent. He just stared into the fire. Clara waited. This ranch, it was ours. We built this cabin, that barn. We were happy. It was good. His voice was monotone, a man reading a list of supplies. I was gone 4 years ago, maybe 5. I don't keep track. I went to Cheyenne to sell our cattle. It was a good year. I was gone. A week, 10 days. I had money. I had bought her a bolt of blue cloth for a dress. He stopped. His body was rigid. When I got back, I saw the smoke from the ridge. The cabin. It was gone. Just black timbers. The barn was still standing. I thought maybe an accident. He paused, and his voice dropped so low she could barely hear him. I found her in the root cellar. They'd done it before. Before they... He couldn't say it. 4 of them, trappers, headed north. They'd been drinking. They saw her, alone. He took a long, shuddering breath. They were not kind. Clara closed her eyes. She saw it. She saw it all. I found them, he said, his voice now flat, hard steel. It took me 2 months. I tracked them all the way to the Wind River. They had split up. I found them one by one. He looked down at his own hands, gloved and scarred. I did not ask them questions. I did not give them a chance to pray. I just ended them. The last one, I took my time. The cabin was silent. They put a price on my head, $1,000. Eli Lonergan, wanted for the murder of 4 men. So I came back here, I buried her on the hill, and I've been here ever since, hiding, waiting. He finally turned his head, looking at her over his shoulder. His eyes were furnaces of old pain. Last night, when I touched you, and you stood there, so open, all I could see was her. What they did, how she must have looked, and I saw myself as one of them. I couldn't. He turned back to the fire. I'm not a man anymore. Clara, I'm just a ghost. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did, for frightening you. Clara stood there, her body aching. She understood. She who had stabbed a man. He who had hunted and killed. The only difference was the reason, her survival. His revenge. She did not go to him. She did not touch him. His rejection had been absolute, and his confession had explained it, but it had not healed it. He had looked at her and seen a horror. She walked past him, got the coffee beans, and began to grind them. The shrie, shrie, shrie of the grinder was the only sound. I'll work, she said, her voice as flat as his. You pay me to work. I'll stay till the snow clears. If you'll have me, then I'll go. He nodded, his face hidden. Aye, the snows. The coldness returned, but it was a new cold. It was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of 2 people who knew each other's deepest, most terrible secrets, and did not know how to live with them. For days, they were 2 shadows in the cabin. They worked. She cooked. He chopped wood. They passed the jerky, the biscuits, the salt, without a word, their hands never touching. The air was heavy, brittle. They moved around each other, careful not to brush shoulders. They were 2 pots of water, simmering on a low, dangerous heat, ready to boil over or go cold. Then the world turned white again. It was not a storm. It was a war. The wind did not howl. It bellowed, a low,
constant, vibrating sound that made the timbers of the cabin groan. The snow did not fall. It moved sideways, a solid wall of white that erased the sky. The land, the barn 20 yards away. They were trapped for 2 days, feeding the fire. The tension between them stretched thin as a wire. On the 3rd night, the sound of the wind was joined by another, a sharp, terrible crack, like a gunshot, followed by the sound of splintering timber and a horrible, prolonged groan. And then, above the storm, the screaming of horses. "The barn!" Eli roared. The word ripped from his throat. He was at the door in an instant, fighting his way into his coat. He grabbed his rifle, though Clara could not imagine why. He plunged the heavy iron bar from the door and shoved it open. The world was not there, only a churning, screaming wall of white. "Eli, you can't!" Clara shouted over the din. "The horses!" he yelled back, and plunged into the white. He was gone. Clara stood in the doorway, the snow blasting her face, blinding her. She could not let him. She grabbed her thin shawl and the lit lantern, though she knew it was useless, and followed him, tying the shawl over her face. She could not see. She could only feel, her feet sinking into snow that was waist-deep. She aimed for where the barn should be. She heard the horses. The sound was one of pure terror. She stumbled into the wreckage. The lantern cast a tiny, insane circle of light. The main roof of the barn had given in to the weight. A massive central beam, a foot thick, had snapped and fallen. The horses were trapped. The old mare was down, her eyes white. Eli's buckskin was thrashing, pinned by a section of the collapsed roof. Eli was like a madman. He had thrown his rifle down and was tearing at the splintered wood and heavy snow with his bare hands. "I'm here, boy! I'm here!" he roared at the buckskin. He was trying to lift a section of the roof. "Clara, the mare! Get her loose!" Clara scrambled, digging at the snow, her fingers instantly numb. She found the mare's tether and cut it with Eli's knife, which he kept by the door. She slapped the horse's rump. "Go! Get up! Go!" The mare, terrified, found her footing and bolted, disappearing into the white. "The beam!" Eli shouted. "It's on his leg! I have to lift it!" He put his back under the main, fallen beam, his boots slipping in the snow. "Yah!" he grunted, his body straining. The buckskin was free. It scrambled, its leg bleeding, and lunged past him, following the mare. Eli let the beam fall, panting. And then the rest of the roof gave way. It did not collapse slowly. The entire north wall, weakened and pushed by the wind, fell inward, a tangle of logs, sod, and heavy snow. "Eli!" Clara screamed. He had no time to move. He looked up, his eyes wide in the lantern light. A heavy rafter struck him. It did not hit him cleanly. It glanced off his head and shoulder, smashing him backward against the one remaining stall wall. The sound was a sickening, wet thud. He crumpled. He just disappeared. The lantern fell from Clara's hand, its light extinguished, plunging them into a chaos of wind and darkness. "Eli!" She scrambled, crying his name. She found him. He was half buried. She dug him out, her hands raw, pulling at the snow and debris. He was unconscious, a dead weight. She found his face. It was wet. "Eli, wake up!" She slapped his cheek. Nothing. She put her arms under his, and she began to drag him. It was impossible. He was a 200-pound man, and she was wading through a frozen ocean. "You will not!" she grunted, her teeth gritted. "You will not die. Not here. Not like this." She pulled. She fell. She got up. She pulled again. It took her 10 minutes. It took her a lifetime. She dragged his body back to the cabin, through the doorway, and collapsed, shoving the heavy bar back into place. The cabin was silent, save for the screaming wind outside and her own ragged breath. He was on the floor, a heap of wet wool and snow. She dragged him to his cot. She lit every candle she had. She pulled off his coat, his shirt.
The left side of his head was a matted ruin of blood and hair. A gash, deep and ragged. His shoulder was wrong. It sat at a sickening angle. She tore a strip from her only spare chemise. She cleaned the wound with the last of the whiskey. He groaned, a deep, animal sound, but his eyes did not open. She bandaged his head, the linen turning dark red almost immediately. She felt his forehead. He was cold, too cold. She piled every blanket they owned onto him. By morning, the cold had been replaced by fire. The fever hit. He was burning. He thrashed, his good arm flailing. He was not in the cabin. He was gone. "Mary," he cried out, his voice sharp, clear. "Mary, I'm coming. Just hold on." Clara, who had been spooning water between his lips, froze. Her heart felt like a cold stone. "The blue dress, it's for you," he mumbled, his head tossing on the pillow. Don't go. She sat beside him, wiping his face with a cold, wet rag. "I'm here, Eli," she whispered. No, leave her," he suddenly shouted, his body arching off the cot. Don't you touch her. I'll kill you. I'll kill all of you." He was back in the fire, back in his own private hell. He was fighting, his face contorted. "Mary," his voice broke, becoming a child's sob. "It's so cold. Where did you go? Mary, I'm so cold." His right hand shot out, grasping, finding nothing. It flailed, desperate, searching for an anchor in his sea of pain. Clara took it. His hand closed on hers. It closed with a desperate, crushing strength. He stopped thrashing. His body relaxed. Just slightly. He was still lost in the fever, but he was holding on to her. He pulled her hand, pulling her closer, until her arm was braced on the cot beside him. He did not let go. He held her hand as if he were a drowning man, and she was the only solid thing in the world. He was dreaming of his dead wife, but he was holding her hand. Clara sat there, her body aching with exhaustion. She watched his face, now calm, his breathing still ragged. She looked at their joined hands. She leaned in, her lips close to his ear, her voice a raw whisper that was just for him. "I'm not hurt, but I'll stay, if you'll let me." He groaned softly, a sound of pain or assent. She could not tell, but his grip tightened. He did not let go. He was not conscious when his fever broke. It left him not in a rush, but like a tide going out, slow and draining, leaving him beached, weak and hollow. He drifted for a full day in a gray fog, aware of sounds, of touch, but unable to open his eyes. He was aware of the water, cool, clean water, spooned against his cracked lips. He was aware of a hand, a small, rough hand, that wiped his face with a damp cloth. It was gentle. It was the first gentle thing he had felt in 4 years. He was aware of the pain, the deep, hot throb in his shoulder, which felt as if it had been torn from his body, and the sharp, splitting agony in his head. He was aware, most of all, of the hand he was holding. He had woken in the deep of the fever, in the throes of a nightmare, his throat raw from screaming Mary's name. He had lunged for an anchor, and a hand had taken his, a real, warm, living hand, and it had not let go. Through the rest of the fever, through the ghosts and the terror, it had held on. When he finally opened his eyes, the cabin was bright with the white, reflected light of the snow. The storm was over. Clara was sitting on the stool, her back to him, mending his torn shirt, the one he had ripped from her hands. He tried to speak. A dry croak was all that came out. She spun around, her eyes wide. He looked at her. He saw the dark circles of exhaustion under her eyes. He saw the way her hair, undone, fell around her face. He saw her hands, red and raw from lye and snow and his blood. He looked at his own right hand, lying on the blanket. He remembered. He rasped. You held on," she said, her voice flat. She stood and came to the cot, bringing the tin cup of water. "Drink." He tried to lift his head. A bolt of white-hot pain shot through his skull, and he groaned, falling back. "Don't move," she ordered. She slid her arm under his head, gently, firmly, and lifted him just enough to drink. The water was the best thing he had ever tasted. She let his head rest back on the pillow. Her arm was still under him. She did not pull it away. She looked at his left shoulder. It was a ruin of black and purple, swollen to twice its normal size, bound tightly in strips of her own clothing. "It was out," she said simply. "I put it back in as best I could. The wound on your head, it was deep. I stitched it." He stared at her. This woman, this thin, worn woman he had brought from a saloon. She had dragged him from the wreckage. She had fought the storm. She had set his shoulder. She had stitched his head. "Clara," he whispered. "Don't talk," she said. She pulled her arm free and went to the fire, where a thin broth was simmering. She brought him a bowl. She fed him, like a child, one spoonful at a time. He was too weak to lift his hand. The shame of it was profound. He was a killer, a hunter, a man who had lived alone in the mountains, and he was being spoon-fed by the woman he had terrified and rejected. He tried to turn his head. "I'm sorry." She stopped, the spoon halfway to his lips. "For what?" The other night, before, I was—" "I know what you were," she said, her voice not unkind, but firm. "You were a ghost. Now you're just a man. Eat." She did not blame him. She did not coddle him. She simply tended to him. The next 2 weeks were a blur of this new, silent reality. He was her prisoner, in a cell made of his own broken body. He could do nothing for himself. She did everything. She cleaned him. She fed him. She changed the bloody bandage on his head. She kept the fire roaring, which meant she had to go out into the snow, find the axe, and chop the wood herself. He would lie there, listening to the thwack, thwack, thwack of the axe, and his own helplessness was a worse pain than his shoulder. He watched her. He had never truly seen her before. He saw the efficiency in her movements. She wasted nothing. She was as lean and tough as a whipcord. He saw the intelligence in her eyes as she measured out their dwindling supplies of flour and beans. He saw the deep, ingrained weariness, but he never saw fear. Not anymore. The silence between them changed. It was no longer the empty, cold void of his grief. It was not the charged, electric tension of their shame. It was a new silence, a full one. It was the quiet of two people who had seen the bottom and were now, slowly, climbing back out. He began to heal. The wound on his head scabbed over. The fever was gone. The agony in his shoulder subsided to a dull, constant ache. He could sit up, propped against the wall. "You saved my life," he said one afternoon. He was stronger. His voice was almost his own. She was washing the bandages in a bucket of snowmelt. She did not look up. "You saved mine. In the saloon. I suppose we're even." "No," he said. "Not even." She finally looked at him. Her gaze was direct, unwavering. The woman from the saloon, the cowering girl, was gone. This was someone new. "No," she agreed quietly. "Not even." The snows began to recede. The world thawed. A weak, pale sun returned. The days grew longer. He was able to stand, his left arm in a sling she had fashioned from a grain sack. He stood at the door, leaning on the frame, and looked out. The ranch was a wreck. The barn was a pile of charred, splintered timber. The corral fence was smashed. It was the end of his world, the place he had built with Mary. It was all gone. He felt Clara come to stand beside him. She said nothing. She just stood there, breathing the cold, clean air. "It's all gone," he whispered. "Wood can be cut," she said. "Fences can be mended. You're alive, Eli." He looked at her. He had been so lost in his grief for what was dead. He had not seen the living, breathing thing right beside him. "We're low," she said, pulling her thin shawl tight. "Flour, coffee, and you need laudanum. The pain, it's not good for you."
"Oh, I can't ride," he said, the shame returning. "I can—" He turned. "Town? Clara, you can't. After Silas. They're cowards," she said. "They won't do anything to a woman in broad daylight. And Phineas Mott will sell to me. Money is money." He wanted to forbid it, to order her to stay. But he had no right, and he had no strength. He was a hermit, and his fortress was broken. "Take the mare," he said, his voice hollow. Take the money from the tin under my cot." She nodded. Once, she put on her thin shawl, took the small pouch of coins, and left. He watched her saddle the sway-backed mare, her movements sure, and ride out. He was alone for the first time since she had arrived, and the cabin felt empty, cold, and dead. The ride to Three Forks was quick. The ground was clear in patches. Clara kept her face set. She would not show fear. The town was just as she remembered it, muddy and mean. Phineas Mott, the storekeeper, looked up when she entered. His eyes were cold. "Ma'am, I need flour," she said, her voice clear. 20 pounds, and coffee, and a bottle of laudanum." He turned, his back to her, and began to gather the items. The saloon doors swung open, and 2 men entered. One was Silas Croft. His right hand was heavily bandaged, his arm in a sling. He stopped dead when he saw her. His face, already puffy, turned a dark, mottled red. "You!" he snarled. You're that hermit's whore." Clara did not flinch. She kept her eyes on Phineas Mott. The other man, a stranger, looked at her. He was well-dressed, in a store-bought coat, and his face was clean-shaven. He looked intelligent and cold. "Well, now, Silas," the man said, his voice smooth. "Is this the lady from the ridge?" "That's her," Silas spat. "She's the one. Stood right in front of him. That Lonergan. He broke my hand." The stranger's eyes settled on Clara. It was a heavy, assessing gaze. "Lonergan, you say Eli Lonergan?" "That's his name," Silas said. "I've been looking for a man by that name." The stranger said, almost to himself. He took a step toward Clara. "My name is Finn Mallory. I'm an old acquaintance of Eli's. How is he? I heard there was some trouble out at his place." Clara's blood ran cold. Finn, the name was a snake. "He's fine," she said, her voice tight. "Is he now?" Finn smiled. It did not touch his eyes. "I heard different. I heard he was laid up, hurt bad. You heard wrong." "Did I?" Finn chuckled. He looked at Silas. "Silas here says there's a bounty, $1,000, for Eli Lonergan, for murder." Clara's face paled. She could not help it. Finn saw it. "Ah, so you do know. You're harboring a wanted man, Missy." "That's a crime in this territory." He's a killer," Silas growled. "He needs to hang." Phineas Mott slapped the sack of flour on the counter, his face pale. "That'll be $4.50. Clara's hands were shaking. She fumbled with the money pouch, her fingers clumsy. She pulled out the coins, dropping one. It rolled on the floor. Finn Mallory bent, smoothly, and picked it up. He held it out to her, between his thumb and forefinger. "You tell Eli," he said, his voice a soft, venomous purr. "You tell him Finn Mallory is in town. You tell him I'm coming to see him, to talk about old times, and new money. He'll know what I mean." Clara snatched the coin from his fingers. She grabbed her supplies. She did not run. She walked, her back straight, out of the store. She did not mount the mare. She led it until she was clear of the muddy street, clear of the staring, hateful eyes. Then she mounted, and she rode. She rode as if the devil himself were behind her. When she got back, Eli was standing in the doorway, his rifle in his good hand. The relief that flooded his face when he saw her was so profound it almost made her weep. "They're coming," she said, stumbling from the saddle, dropping the supplies. "He's here. A man. He says his name is Finn Mallory." The color drained from Eli's face. He leaned against the doorframe.
his bad shoulder hitting the wood.
Finn? The name was a death sentence. He was my friend,
Eli whispered, his eyes on the horizon. Before Mary, we rode the cattle trails together. I took a bullet for him in Ogallala. He knows about the bounty, Clara said, her voice shaking.
He's coming. Eli, he's coming for the money.
He's a traitor, Eli said. The words were dead, flat.
We have to go,
Clara said, grabbing his good arm.
We can go into the mountains. You know them. We can hide.
Eli looked at her. He looked at the ruined barn. He looked at the cabin, the one he had built. He had been running for 4 years. No, he said. He straightened up, his face setting into the hard, granite lines she remembered. I'm done running. They came 3 days later. At dusk, Clara saw them first. 5 riders, black silhouettes against the dying, orange sky.
Eli,
she whispered. He was already there, standing in the shadow of the doorway. He was wearing his gun belt, the pistol heavy on his right hip. His rifle was in his good hand. His left arm was still in the sling, strapped tight to his chest. He was pale and sweating, but his eyes were clear. The riders stopped, 100 yards out, just beyond the broken fence line. Finn Mallory rode forward, alone. He stopped 20 yards from the door. He was not wearing a saloon coat. He was dressed for work. A gun belt was buckled over his hips. Eli, he called out. His voice was calm, conversational. It's been a long time. Partner, you look a little unwell. Eli stepped out of the shadow. The rifle was heavy, but he held it steady. You look like a snake, Finn. Finn laughed, a short, sharp sound. Maybe, but I'm a rich snake, or I will be. $1,000. Eli.
That's a lot of money.
For a friend? Friendship don't pay for whiskey, Finn said, his voice hardening.
I know what you did. Eli, those men,
you butchered them. You deserve to hang. They got what they earned, Eli said, his voice a low growl. And now you'll get what you've earned. Come on out. I'm taking you to Cheyenne, alive or dead. It makes no difference to the bounty. Get off my land, Finn. Finn sighed. He turned his head and called back to the other men. He wants it the hard way. Silas Croft was with them, his arm in a sling, a rifle in his good hand. Let's burn him out, he shrieked, his voice high with rage. Burn the whole damn place. 2 of the men Clara didn't know, dismounted. They had torches, already lit. They advanced, slow, toward the pile of rubble that had been the barn. No, Eli said. He raised his rifle. Don't! Or what? Finn mocked. You'll shoot me? A one-armed, half-dead man. You can't even hold that rifle steady. It was true. The barrel was wavering, his body shaking with the strain.
He's not alone. Clara.
She ran from the cabin. She ran from the darkness and stood in the open, her body placed squarely in front of Eli. She was just a woman in a gray dress, her hair wild, her hands empty. She stood between the rifles and the man she loved. Finn's face tightened. Get out of the way, girl. This isn't your concern. This is law. This isn't law, she screamed, her voice tearing, raw with terror and a greater, more terrible rage. This is greed. This is you. He's not who he was. He's sick. He's a broken man. Leave him alone. She's the whore, Silas yelled. Shoot her, too. Silas raised his rifle with his good hand. He aimed it at Clara. No, Eli said. It was not a shout. It was a promise. He moved, shoving Clara with his hip, spinning her behind him as he dropped to one knee. The rifle came up, not to his shoulder. He was not strong enough. He braced his good elbow on his knee. Silas fired. The bullet whipped past Eli's head, splintering the doorframe. Eli's rifle answered. The sound was one flat, deafening crack. Silas screamed. He did not fall. His rifle clattered to the ground. He grabbed his left shoulder, his good shoulder, his face a mask of shocked pain. Eli had not missed. The other men opened fire. Bullets thudded into the cabin logs. Inside, Eli roared at Clara, shoving her through the door. He stayed on the knee, in the open. A target. He was protecting the doorway. He fired again. A second shot. It did not hit a man. It hit the torch one of the men was holding, exploding it in a shower of sparks. The man yelped, beating at his burning sleeve. "Finn!" Eli yelled, his voice raw with effort. "Call them off. I'll kill you. I swear to God, I'll kill you where you sit." Finn Mallory sat on his horse, his own pistol in his hand. He had not fired. He was watching. He was watching a one-armed, wounded man, on his knees, disable two of his men in 2 shots, without killing. He was watching a man who could kill, but was choosing not to. And he knew, with a sudden, cold certainty, that the next shot would not be a warning. Silas was weeping, holding his ruined shoulder. The other man had put out the fire on his sleeve and was backing away. "He's not worth it," Finn snarled, his voice thick with frustration. He holstered his pistol. "He's not worth dying for. Grab Silas. Let's go." The men scrambled to obey. They hauled Silas onto his horse. Finn looked at Eli, who was still on one knee, the rifle steady, aimed at his heart. "This isn't over. Lonergan." Finn spat. "It is," Eli said, his voice dead. "Come back, and I'll bury you on that hill." Finn stared at him for a long, hard second. He looked at Clara, her face a pale shadow in the darkness of the cabin. He yanked his horse's head around and spurred it, riding fast, his men scrambling after him. They were gone. The silence that fell was absolute. Eli stayed on his knee, the rifle still aimed. For a full minute, then his strength, his will, all of it, just evaporated. The rifle fell from his grasp. He collapsed onto his side in the dirt, his body convulsing in a spasm of pain. His shoulder, the force of the rifle's recoil had torn it open again. "Eli!" Clara was beside him, her hands on his face. He was conscious, his eyes squeezed shut, his teeth gritted. "Inside!" she panted, her voice cracking. "Help me! Get inside!" He tried. He got his feet under him, his good arm thrown over her shoulder. She was his crutch. She was his strength. She dragged him, and he stumbled. Back into the cabin. He fell onto the cot. His shirt was soaked in fresh, dark blood. The ranch was a ruin. The night was cold. The enemy was gone. But the battle was lost. She lit the lantern. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely strike the match. She did not get the bandages. Not yet. She looked at him. He was lying on his side, his face pale as death, his eyes watching her. He had seen her stand for him. She had seen him fight for her. The ghosts were gone. All of them. Mary, Jebson, the men in the saloon. They had all been burned away in the gunfire. There were no words. There was nothing left to say. She walked to the cot. She did not cry. Her eyes were clear. And for the first time in her life, she was not afraid. He held out his good hand, his right hand. She took it. He did not pull her. He just held on. She sat on the cot, beside him. He did not let go. He was a mass of pain and blood and exhaustion. She was a woman in a gray dress that smelled of gunpowder and fear. She leaned down, and she kissed him. His lips were dry, cracked, and tasted of salt. He did not pull away. He did not see a ghost. He kissed her back. His one good arm came up, his hand tangling in her hair, pulling her down, as if he were drowning and she were air. It was not a kiss of seduction. It was a kiss of arrival. It was a final, desperate claim. "Clara!" He breathed against her mouth. She pulled back, just enough to see his eyes. They were dark, filled with pain, and with a raw, desperate hunger that had nothing to do with lust and everything to do with life. He was broken. She was broken. And here, in the ruins, they were, finally, whole. She didn't need to be asked. She didn't need to offer. Her hands went to the buttons of her own dress. She unfastened them, one by one. She pulled the dress from her shoulders, the same way he had done, but this time it was not a surrender. It was a choice. She pulled back the blankets from his cot, ignoring the blood. She lay down beside him, her thin chemise a whisper against his uninjured side. He groaned, a sound of agony as he shifted, his body on fire, But he turned to her. "This," he whispered, his voice thick. "Clara, I'm hurt."
"I know,"
she said. She put her hand on his cheek, her thumb stroking his rough beard. "I know." It was not a night for passion. It was a night for healing. It was a night for the first true touch. She lay against him, her warmth seeping into his good side. His arm, his one good arm, wrapped around her, pulling her tight. His hand splayed on her back. He buried his face in her neck, breathing her in. The smell of soap and smoke and woman. It was acclaiming. She held him, her hand stroking his hair, his back, whispering to him. It did not matter what she said. She was just there. Her body was a shield. Her warmth was a promise. He held her as if she were the last thing in the world. He held her, and his grip was not that of a man holding a whore. It was that of a man holding his life. In the small cabin, with the firelight painting shadows on the walls, two broken souls, scarred and ruined, finally found a place to rest. They were not healed. They were not saved. But they were, at last, together. The fire burned down, and in the darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of their lives, they slept. The winter did not break. It rotted. It gave up its hold on the high prairie not in a single, clean thaw, but in a long, slow surrender. The world turned from white to a deep, sucking brown. The snow melted from the top down, leaving the ground a treacherous sea of mud, ice, and half-frozen water. The wind, no longer a blade, became a wet, heavy sigh, carrying the smell of damp earth and new pine. Life returned, but it was a hard, ugly birth. Inside the cabin, Eli healed with the same stubborn, slow pace. The wound on his head had closed, leaving a raw, puckered scar that vanished into his hairline. His shoulder, however, was a ruin. It had healed wrong, the bone setting at an angle. He would never again have the full strength of that arm. He had crafted a crude crutch from a cured piece of timber, and he spent the first days of the thaw standing in the doorway. Watching, he watched as Clara, her face set in a mask of grim determination, began to reclaim the land. She salvaged what she could from the barn. She found boards that were not too splintered, logs that were not too charred. With his one good arm, Eli had showed her how to use the sawbuck, and she sawed. He sat on the porch, his rifle across his lap, and watched her, his face tight with the humiliation of his weakness. "The log is too high," he would growl, his voice rough. "You're binding the saw. Let your legs do the work." "I am," she'd pant, her arms aching, her breath clouding in the damp air. "You're fighting it. Let the blade work." She would stop, wipe the sweat and grime from her face with her sleeve, and glare at him. But she would do as he said, and the blade would move more easily. They worked like this for weeks. Two broken people, rebuilding a broken life. He was the mind, she was the body. She cleared the wreckage. She dug new post holes, sinking them deep into the mud. He sat and sharpened the new posts, his knife moving with his old, economical precision. She did not complain. She did not speak of the blood he had lost on the cot, or the nights she had sat up, listening to his fevered breathing. She just worked. She hauled water. She cooked their dwindling supplies. She mended the fence line. Her hands, once soft, now becoming as scarred and calloused as his. One day, she found an old, half-rotted crate. Inside, protected from the worst of the snow, were Mary's gardening tools, a rusted trowel, a three-pronged fork. Clara carried them to the small, fallow patch of earth beside the cabin. She began to turn the soil. It was hard, cold work. Eli watched her from the doorway. He watched her break the clods of earth, her back bending, her body moving with a steady, rhythmic strength. That was his wife's garden. He had not touched it, not once. In 4 years, he had let it go to weeds and ruin. He watched Clara rake it clean. He watched her take a small linen pouch from her pocket. Seeds.
Phineas Mott had given her a handful of dried bean and squash seeds when she had bought their last sack of flour. She was planting. She was not just rebuilding what was lost. She was planting something new. He turned, his crutch thumping on the floorboards, and went inside. He could not watch. The next time they went to town, the world was green. It had come on sudden, a flush of impossible color across the plains. The mud had dried, and the air was warm. Eli could ride, though mounting the horse was a slow, agonizing process. He rode the old, sway-backed mare. Clara rode his buckskin. The horse, his leg healed with a slight limp, had taken to her. They rode into Three Forks side by side. The town had not changed. The whispers were still there. Phineas Mott looked up from his counter. Silas Croft was not in sight. The men in the saloon, drinking their midday beer, came to the doors to watch. They were no longer the hermit and the whore. They were Lonergan, the killer, and his woman. The townspeople looked at them with a new, colder fear. They were outcasts, pariahs, the man who had faced down Finn Mallory and the woman who had stood with him. Clara kept her eyes forward. She could feel the stares. She felt the shame, the old familiar heat, rise in her neck. Eli, riding beside her, did not look at the townspeople. He looked at her. He reached out, his one good hand, and briefly, for just a moment, laid it on her forearm. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a gesture of ownership, an anchor. "They are nothing. We are here." She lifted her chin. She looked at Phineas Mott, her eyes clear. "We need flour," she said, her voice steady. "And salt and cartridges." They no longer cared. The judgment of these people was a thin, high sound, like the wind, and they had survived a winter that was far, far worse. That night, back in the cabin, the new roof half finished, Eli sat at the small desk, the one that had held Mary's handkerchief. He had a pot of ink, a new pen, and a sheaf of paper. Clara sat on her cot, mending a saddle blanket. He began to write. His good hand was stiff. The writing was slow, cramped, the letters clumsy. He was not a learned man, but he was a deliberate one. She watched him. He was not writing a list. He was writing a letter. He would write a line, then stop, his gaze going to the fire, lost in thought. He would dip the pen and write again. He worked for over an hour. The only sound was the scratch of the nib on the paper and the soft pop of the fire. Finally, he was done. He sanded the page, folded it, and put it in an envelope. He looked at Clara. "I'm sending this to Cheyenne," he said. "To the territorial court." She waited. "It's a confession," he said, his voice flat. "All of it. The men I tracked, what I did to them, why, and I'm asking for a pardon." Clara's hand, holding the needle, froze. "A pardon? Eli, they'll hang you. You confessed." "Maybe," he said. He looked at the letter in his hand. "I've been hiding for 4 years. I've been a ghost. I can't live like that anymore. Not with—" He did not finish. He looked at her. "Not with you. I'm a killer. Clara, that's the truth. I killed those men. I took the law, and I twisted it. Now I have to give it back. Whatever they decide, it will be a decision. It will be an end. I'm tired of waiting." He was risking everything. He was risking the rope, just for the chance to be a free man. To be her free man. "What if they say no?" she whispered, her throat tight. "Then I'll know where I stand," he said. He looked at the rifle on the wall. "And I won't go easy." He sealed the letter. The next day, he rode to town alone, and he gave it to the stagecoach driver, along with a silver dollar. And then they waited. A month passed. The garden she had planted began to show small, green shoots. The new roof on the barn was finished, a patch of raw, yellow pine against the old, weathered wood. Eli's shoulder had settled into a permanent, dull ache, and he had learned to move, to work, to live, with his left arm hanging, almost useless.
at his side. He no longer used the crutch. He just limped. They had found a new rhythm, a life of shared work. They spoke little, but they no longer needed to. They moved as one. She would reach for a tool, and he would have it in his hand, ready for her. He would go to lift a log, and she would be there, taking the heavier end, her strong back bending to the task, the passion of that one. Terrible night had cooled, but it had tempered into something harder and more durable. It was an intimacy of shared survival, but under it all, the waiting. Every rider on the horizon was a threat. Every distant sound was the law. He was cleaning his pistol, his good hand moving with slow, careful motions. When they heard the horse, it was one rider, coming fast. Eli was on his feet in an instant, the pistol in his hand. Clara stepped in front of him, her eyes on the door. The rider did not stop at the fence. He rode right up to the porch. He was not Finn. He was not a bounty hunter. He wore the blue, rumpled uniform of a territorial messenger. "Eli Lonergan?" the man called out, reining in his horse. Eli stepped onto the porch, the pistol still in his hand, half hidden by his leg. "I'm Lonergan. Got a letter for you." The man said. He looked tired. He pulled a thick, official-looking envelope from his saddlebag. "From the court, in Cheyenne." Clara's hand went to her mouth. This was it. Eli holstered the pistol. He took the letter. His hand was not shaking. "Thank you," he said. "Sign here," the man said, holding out a logbook. Eli signed his name. The man nodded, turned his horse, and rode away, leaving them in a cloud of dust. Eli just stood there, staring at the envelope. It was heavy. It was sealed with red wax. "Eli," Clara whispered. He looked at her. His face was pale, his eyes unreadable. He sat heavily on the porch step. He broke the seal with his thumb. He pulled out the single, folded piece of paper. He read it. He did not move. He just read. Clara watched his face. She saw nothing. No relief, no despair. He just sat, frozen, his gaze fixed on the page. "Eli?" she breathed, stepping toward him. What is it?" He did not answer. He did not seem to hear. She knelt in the dirt in front of him, her hands on his knees. "Eli, please." He let out a breath, a long, slow, shuddering sound, as if he had been holding it for a month. He handed her the paper. She read it. It was from the office of the territorial governor. It was full of legal words she did not understand, but she found the ones that mattered. "In light of your full confession, and in light of the new testimony, received from the township of Three Forks," she looked up, confused. "Testimony? Wherein Phineas Mott and 6 other townsmen did swear that in the winter of 1888, during the great fire that consumed the livery, you, Eli Lonergan, did, at great risk to your own person, enter the burning structure and lead the horses to safety, and did organize the men to stop the fire, saving the town, an act of public service." Eli had never told her. He had never mentioned it. "And given your subsequent 4 years of peaceful isolation, and the circumstances of your crimes, we do, therefore, grant this full and unconditional pardon. Your name is cleared. Your bounty is rescinded. You are a free man." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She read the words again. A free man. The paper fell from her fingers. She looked at Eli. He was still staring forward, his jaw working. A single tear tracked a clean path through the grime on his cheek. Clara made a sound, a half sob, half laugh, and threw her arms around his neck. She buried her face in his good shoulder, and she wept. She wept for the blood, for the fear, for the cold, for Mary, for Jebson, for all of it. Eli's good arm came up, his hand tangling in her hair, holding her tight. He was shaking. His whole body was shaking, in great, silent, racking sobs. He was a man undone. His 4 years of stone-cold grief and rage, his month of terror, all of it breaking at once. They knelt there, in the dirt, holding each other, and they wept. They walked that evening. As the sun was setting, they did not walk toward the town. They walked up the low hill behind the cabin, the one where Mary was buried. Eli stood by the simple wooden cross for a long time. Clara stood back, giving him his space. He was not crying. He was just looking. Finally, he touched the wood of the cross. "It's done, Mary," he whispered, his voice for her alone. "It's done." He turned and walked to Clara. He took her hand. They walked on, over the crest of the hill. Below them, in a small hollow, was a ruin. It was a small stone church built by settlers who had long since moved on. The roof was gone, the windows were empty holes, but the walls, gray stone and mortar, were still standing, strong and true. They walked inside, the setting sun painting the interior gold and red. Eli stopped in the center, where an altar had once been. He looked at Clara. The firelight of the sunset was in her hair, turning it to straw gold. He did not have a speech. He did not have a ring. He reached down to his own belt, where he kept a coil of thin, strong rope. He took his knife, and with his good hand, he cut a small piece. His fingers, still thick and clumsy, worked the rope. He tied a knot, a small, perfect, round knot. He fashioned it into a circle. He took her left hand, the hand that was scarred from lie, calloused from the saw. "Clara," he said, his voice rough, "I have nothing. This ranch is a ruin. I'm a broken man. I have nothing to offer you, but you have me," she whispered. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm yours, Eli," she said. "If you'll have me. I have been since you stood for me in the saloon." He slid the small, rough circle of rope onto her third finger. It fit perfectly. "This is all I have," he said. "It's everything," she said. He leaned in, and in the ruins of the forgotten church, he kissed his wife. They returned to the cabin as the last light faded. They ate a simple meal, biscuits and beans. They were free. That night, the small room was warm. He had built up the fire. Clara sat on her cot, brushing out her hair. Eli sat on his, watching her. The candlelight was soft, flattering, hiding the scars on the walls and the wear on their faces. He was still wearing it, around his neck. On a thin leather cord was a simple, tarnished gold band, Mary's wedding ring. He had worn it, hidden under his shirt, every day for 4 years. A mourning band, a noose of his own making. Clara stopped brushing. She looked at him. He saw her gaze. He looked down at the ring, resting against his chest. He had been pardoned by the law, but he had not yet pardoned himself. Clara stood. She walked to him. She did not sit, she knelt, in front of him, so their eyes were level. She put her hands on his knees. She looked at him. Her love, a physical, tangible thing in the small, quiet room. She smiled, a small, soft smile. "Now it's your turn," she whispered. "Take it off." Eli looked at her. He looked at the woman who had dragged him from the snow, the woman who had stood between him and the guns, the woman who wore a circle of rope on her hand. Hand, his good hand, rose to his chest. It was shaking. He grasped the ring. He held it for a long, last second. He closed his eyes. A final memory, a final farewell. Then his fingers fumbled with the knot on the leather cord. He could not undo it. His hand was trembling too much. Clara raised her own hand. She covered his, her fingers, sure and steady, found the knot, and she untied it. She slid the cord over his head. The ring was free. He did not throw it in the fire. He did not hide it. He just held it in his open palm for a moment. Then he placed it gently on the desk beside him, beside the letter from Cheyenne. He looked at Clara. The ghost was gone. He was free. He reached for her, and he pulled her home. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please share your location in the comments to connect with us. Be sure to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and let us know your thoughts.